You know that feeling, right? Every teacher has been there. You're staring at a blank page, planning a new unit, and you just think, how do I make this actually stick? How do I get my students to truly understand this, not just memorize it? Well, let's get into it, because the International Baccalaureate has a really fascinating answer, and it's built right into the DNA of their unit planners. So the real challenge here is, how do we shift from just planning lessons to actually planning for deep, meaningful learning? The IB is all about inquiry, this idea that students have to be active in building their own understanding. But that immediately brings up a huge question, right? How do you plan for discovery without everything just becoming, well, chaotic? You can really see the difference when you put them side by side. Over on one side, you've got your traditional lesson planning. It's usually about covering the content, getting through the chapter, it's driven by the textbook, and the focus is on what activities the students are going to do. But the IB approach to unit planning, that's a whole different game. The goal isn't to cover stuff, it's to build understanding. It's not driven by a textbook, it's driven by questions and inquiry. And it's not about activities, it's about the big, powerful concepts. And this is absolutely crucial to get. For the IB, inquiry isn't just some fun thing you do on a Friday afternoon. As it says right here in the notes, it is the dominant pedagogy. It's the engine that drives the whole thing. Every single unit is meant to be this deep, comprehensive dive, all based on inquiry. And that changes absolutely everything about how you plan. Which, of course, brings us right back to that big, looming question. If your students are the ones asking questions and figuring things out, how do you, the teacher, make sure they end up somewhere meaningful? You need a structure. You need a really solid framework. And the IB, well, they didn't just invent one out of thin air. They built theirs on the shoulders of some real giants in education. The first pillar of this whole thing tackles the what. What are we actually teaching? And this idea comes from the incredible work of Dr. Erickson. Her big idea was pretty revolutionary. She said we should stop planning our curriculum around a bunch of topics and start planning it around big, timeless concepts. Erickson basically argued that a curriculum built on fact is forgotten almost as soon as the test is over. But a concept-based one? That's different. That's about building mental models that students can use for the rest of their lives. So instead of just learning about, say, the French Revolution, students learn about the concept of revolution itself. What are its patterns, its causes, its consequences? That's an idea they can then use to understand events in history, shifts in science, or even movements in art. And you can see Erickson's fingerprints all over the IB framework. Seriously, in the PYP and MYP, when you see those key and related concepts that anchor every single unit, that is pure Erickson. Her work is the reason the IB prioritizes deep understanding over just covering a ton of content, and why they're always pushing students to apply what they've learned in new situations. Okay, so Erickson gave the IB the what, that focus on big concepts, but what about the how? How do you actually structure the planning? For that, we turn to our second pillar, and this comes from Grant Wiggins and Jay McTighe and their completely game-changing model, Understanding by Design. Now, the idea behind this is so simple, but it is so powerful. You don't start your planning by thinking, okay, what fun stuff are we going to do next week? No, you start by asking two questions. First, what do I want my students to truly understand and be able to do when this is all over? And second, how are they going to prove it to me? You literally start with the destination, and only then do you start building the road to get there. So it all happens in these three really logical stages. Stage 1, you identify those big, enduring understandings you're aiming for. Stage 2, you think like an assessor. What's the final project or task that's going to prove they really get it? And only then, only after you know your destination and how you'll know they've arrived, do you get to stage 3, planning the actual day-to-day lessons and activities. This backward logic is the architectural blueprint for every single IB unit planner, from the little kids and the PYP all the way up through the DP. It's what guarantees that everything is aligned, the big goals, the final assessment, and all the teaching and learning in between. It means nothing is random. Every single activity has a clear and direct purpose. All right, so we've got these two powerhouse philosophies. Erickson is all about the big concepts, and Wiggins and McTighe are all about that purposeful structure. So what did the IB do? Well, this is where it gets really brilliant. Let's just look at them side by side for a second. Erickson's whole focus is on the knowledge, starting with those big transferable concepts to build deep understanding. Wiggins and McTighe, on the other hand, they're focused on the proof. They start with the end assessment to make sure everything is aligned and makes sense. So they have different starting points, but they're both running toward the exact same finish line: real, meaningful learning. So the IB looked at these two amazing models and said, why choose? Instead, they took the conceptual heart and soul from Erickson and fused it with the logical, structural backbone from Wiggins and McTighe, and they created this incredible hybrid. And this is it, the MYP Unit Planner. You have to understand, this thing is not just a form to fill out. It's a carefully engineered pedagogical tool. It's the physical manifestation of how these two powerful philosophies come together to create a plan for deep, inquiry-based learning. Let's just tear it apart for a second. Look right at the top. Key and related concepts, the statement of inquiry. That's all Erickson, making sure the entire unit is grounded in big ideas. But then, and this is the key, look where the summative assessment is. It's right after the big ideas, before you even think about the learning process. That is classic Wiggins and McTighe, forcing you to begin with the end in mind. It's just so elegant how it weaves the two together.
So the big question is, so what? Why does any of this theory matter to the teacher in the classroom on a Tuesday morning or to the student trying to learn?
Well, to put it really simply, it gives you both a destination and a map. Erickson's big picture concepts give you that worthy destination, that deep, transferable understanding you're aiming for. And Wiggins and McTighe's backward design gives you the clear, logical map to actually get there without getting lost along the way. The power of this hybrid model is just huge. It gives teachers total clarity on what they're trying to achieve. It gives every single activity a sense of purpose. And it creates this structure that's strong enough to make sure learning is rigorous, but it's also flexible enough to let students follow their own questions. And at the end of the day, it prepares students to not just know things, but to be able to use what they know in new and complicated situations, which, let's be honest, is the whole point of education in the first place. Ultimately, the IB Planner is so much more than a document. It's an argument. It's an argument that the way we plan fundamentally shapes the way our students learn. And it leaves us, as educators, with maybe the most important question we can ask ourselves. In a world that is changing so fast, what enduring understandings are so critical that they are worth designing our students' entire learning experience around?